after he buries his family, which, by the way, I'm not married or I'll have kids, any of that stuff. But hypothetically, if my wife and child were murdered, I can understand. But man, that man had a lot of mucus coming out of his face. Like, I don't know what's going on, Russell Crowe. It was like all this stuff coming down his nose, his eyes, like blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Mucus going on his dead wife's foot. Very messy. Crucified family is okay. Crucified family is okay, but mucus is where I draw the line.
Yeah.
But
Could he get the man a Kleenex, in between takes?
me and my good friend Adam, who you may remember from episode 4, who's also been helping me with the podcast, had a good idea, do the new Gladiator 2 movie coming out. We decided that in order for me to do that, I would actually have to watch the original Gladiator because I haven't watched it. And normally we do the whole list thing, but today we just skip straight to the point.
Yeah, I gotta say, I was shocked. I was really shocked when you told me that you hadn't seen the first one. I was just nonchalantly throwing it out there, hey, the sequel's coming out, you should see that, and then we do a review on that one. And you go, yeah, but I haven't seen the original. And I just, how do you justify that? Because to me, it's one of the iconic action films for millennial. Growing up as a millennial, I think Matrix and Gladiator are the two very prominent action type movies that I really remember that resonated in my childhood. So how does one just skip over Gladiator? Was it again that whole thing where a lot of people saw it and liked it and you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to go see a movie that's all hyped up now because
No,
I
it
gotta
was
go
more
my own way.
I mean, like I mentioned before in the Saving Private Ryan episode, I've never been too into I never go out of my way for war movies. Not that I'm anti-war movies, but never has been as into period piece type stuff. But to be honest, if I had to really pinpoint it, the two things for me is a lot of times movies that are longer, I just preemptively knowing how ADD I am, I'm like, I don't know about that one. And then my brother was just very into Gladiator. He was super into it, almost to the point where I was just like, I don't know. And then on top of that too, if you want to throw extra, anytime I see Russell Crowe, I just think of that South Park episode about him fighting around the world and all of that type of stuff. So it's like, it takes me a little bit out of it. But after watching it, it's one of those things where I definitely regret not watching it sooner.
So you were entertained.
Yeah, I was saving that pun to later. I was going to be like at
sorry.
the end on a level of not entertained to entertained. How did you rate this movie? I was entertained. It was a different movie than I was expecting because you see the trailer, you hear about the movie, and you're like, all right, this is going to take place in the Coliseum. They're just going to be doing gladiator stuff the whole time. And almost half the movie is just lead up to get to the point where he even is a gladiator. Watching this movie makes me, and I know I'm going to say this, and there's some movies nowadays that definitely still do this type of stuff, but the real Hollywood big budget type film with bunches of extras, a lot spent on not only effects, but just large landscapes they used for war scenes and other stuff like that. The just pure
Practical
pageantry.
effects.
Yeah, just how you can tell that this movie was extremely expensive to make.
Yeah. And similar to Saving Private Ryan, I mean, they had that little intro at the cemetery, but they go right into epic battle. This is what you're here for, folks. Let's get right into it.
They immediately established Maximus, aka Russell Crowe, as a complete badass. You see his face, and then they go through the whole battlefield showing his vast Roman army. Because as someone who hadn't watched the film before, I assumed that he was on a captured side. I didn't know that he was actually a Roman general in the movie. I assumed they had captured him and made him into a gladiator since he had lost. Immediately, they just established this is a big budget movie. Immediately. Yeah. You see him, they go out, you see the whole war field. I believe they're in Germany, they said, fighting Viking X tribes, which they completely massacre those guys. They established immediately that Russell Crowe is a hell of a general who has all the respect of everyone. Everyone
and he fights with his men.
He fights with his men. Yeah.
Right in the back.
Honor.
Up close. Yes.
The man has honor. He's heavily respected, not only by his men, but as well as the Caesar who was watching from the distance the whole time. They do a good job of showing how much the Caesar and the men respect him. And, he's a very simple man. All Russell Crowe wants to do is just go home. Like,
Yes.
he fights because he has to. It's his duty. It's not necessarily that he wants to. He wants to be there for his men, obviously, but all he wants to do is go home and see his wife, his child. And I will say, the second I saw the old vintagey time slow-mo, which they did in a lot of movies, where the slow-mo just kind of seems almost off because it's not, it was slow-mo for the time, but now since slow-mo is so much better, since they have so much more frames when they shoot and other stuff, they can
Yeah.
make it look cleaner. There's that slow-mo of Russell Crowe, Maximus's wife, and child. And to me, once I saw that slow-mo, I knew he was never going to see them alive. You immediately knew. Anytime there's any movies like this where these guys get to see their family in slow-mo in their dream place, like just at home, living a good life, it's either a dream sequence or that at some point he's never going to get to see them alive. And if they do, it's going to be at the very end and they're never going to say a word. They're at the war. They win. The Caesar showers the praise on Maximus. And then all of a sudden, insert Joaquin Phoenix, a young Joaquin Phoenix. Seeing Russell Crowe and Joaquin so young and seeing him in those roles, you could definitely see why after the movie, they were some of the hottest prospects in Hollywood as actors. Both of them did amazing work.
They set up right away the distinction of the general Maximus Russell Crowe, who's fighting alongside his men in the battle, and then Commodus Joaquin Phoenix shows up after everything's over. And his father even says, because he goes like, "Oh, I missed the battle." He goes, "You missed the war, son." And so obviously polar opposites right from the introduction. They're letting you know the differences between these two guys.
Oh yeah, Joaquin, expected just to get the respect because he was the Caesar's son versus
the Nepo baby. Yeah.
The Nepo baby, yeah. And Russell Crowe, Maximus, never, it doesn't even seem like he enjoys, having the praise of the emperor and all that. And he enjoys being able to serve the Roman Empire. But at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't matter as much to him because what he really cares about is his men and his family. Those are the two main things. And the Roman Empire, obviously, those three things. You immediately can tell just by the first interaction between Joaquin Phoenix and Russell Crowe that they're just not going to mix. You can tell immediately that they're just not a fan. The Emperor's talking up Maximus, just how great he is, how much of a leader he is right in front of Joaquin Phoenix, who's just like, oh yeah, that's great, blah, 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 because his main concern is the Emperor's getting old. Who's going to be the next Emperor? It should be him because he's the son of the Emperor. And you find out very quickly, I guess this is one of the main inciting incidents, is that the Emperor has decided to give power of the empire to Maximus instead of Commodus because Maximus earned it and he trusts Maximus more to do what's in the best interest of Rome. And even comes out and says that he doesn't trust his son to be the emperor. Again, that moment, I knew he was dying. Yeah, exactly. You see it, you're like, this guy's dead. Which, it doesn't take a rocket scientist because you know that Russell Crowe's eventually going to be in the Colosseum fighting. That's all the trailers had him fighting in the Colosseum.
It is called Gladiator.
It is called Gladiator, yeah.
Guy who rules Rome, not emperor or whatever. The one thing that totally I just glossed over when I first saw the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, so he wants it to go to Maximus because he thinks he's a noble guy. And he even says, I think his son's immoral or not a moral person, which is like, oh, damn. But the thing that when I was watching it more critically this time that didn't make sense, he wanted to give it to Maximus so that Maximus could give it back to the people so that the Senate could rule. And he says some line about when the Senate is ready. But why isn't the Senate ready? Like, why does it need to go to that pass? Like, why does it need to go Maximus, then the Senate? Why couldn't Marcus Aurelius just give it to the Senate? That seemed, unless I was missing something, that just seemed, okay, plot point for Commodus to hate Maximus, basically. But I don't know if there was anything else you got out of that, or.
So I think one of the reasons that he said that was he didn't think the Senate was ready to take control again because they kept talking about how he thought that, he kept the emperor before he died kept talking about how uh, implying kind of that Rome was almost a cesspool in the
Yeah,
sense that there's just so much corruption. The Washington D.C.
that's true.
swamp of the day, if you will. You
Yeah.
know, so
So Maximus was to drain the swamp. That was his
yeah,
goal.
exactly. Yeah, they wanted. It sounded like he trusted Maximus to do what was in the best because Maximus, I'm not a politician. He's like, that's why I want you, and he
That's true.
even
Yeah.
offers the emperorship to Maximus, and Maximus is like, I don't want it, and he's like, that's why you're the perfect choice. Is that you don't want it. Joaquin Phoenix is entirely. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious, right? If you have other stuff going on, being ambitious, I consider myself ambitious. It's not bad being ambitious. However, being ambitious to the point of killing your own father to get what you want is slightly too ambitious. I
A
like your
bridge too
moxie.
far. Yeah.
Yeah, bridge too far, a little too much. And, he calls in Joaquin Phoenix, Commodus, to tell him that he's going to make Maximus the emperor. And immediately in my head, I was thinking, why did you do this privately? Why is this seems like something you might want to mention beforehand. And
Yeah.
yeah, immediately Joaquin Phoenix is just, I'm disappointed. All the points of what you look for in an emperor, I'm not any of them, but I do have good virtues. I can do certain things. I'm good at this. And to be honest, most of the virtues he said kind of sucked. I forgot specifically what they were, but most of them were stuff that, again, ambition as a virtue, like ambition's cool in the right hands, but unchecked ambition where you do anything to get what you want is bad. So
Yeah.
there's levels. It's crazy, especially during those times, because he kills his father, and then immediately, just because of succession, everyone starts viewing him as the emperor because he's the next heir, and there wasn't a specific heir laid out. And immediately, first thing he does is look at Maximus and is just like, take my hand and serve me like you did my father. And Maximus just immediately leaves because everyone knows that he
Yeah.
killed his dad. It's pretty blatantly apparent he killed his father. So Maximus is just, I ain't doing that, goes to get his stuff. I get it from an honor standpoint, but if your goal is to get home,
Yeah.
dissing the emperor is not a way to get home. It's just not going to work. I knew that much. So immediately turns his back on him, which is, as we find out, a huge no-no. You never turn your back on the emperor. And immediately the emperor's first reaction is, hey, I'm going to kill you and your family, which sending messages is cool, I guess, right? But murdering the man's family seems a bit excessive. If you murder the guy, the family's never even going to know what happened to him. They're already going to be heartbroken. Whatever, going out of your way to, as we find out later, they crucified his small child and wife and set them on fire. And Commodus, aka Joaquin Phoenix, I'm going to keep doing that a lot, guys. Let Russell Crowe, Maximus, later on know it's like, not only did we crucify and burn your family, but all the soldiers had the way with your wife over and over and over again before she died. So not only did she die, but she died terrible, like the worst ways imaginable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's weird because he seems like he's such a respected general. I guess they each have their own different legions, though. So it's like, I guess maybe Maximus had his one loyal group of soldiers, and then there were other soldiers of Rome that just did whatever the emperor said.
No, it's just one of those things where some of the guys were definitely loyal to him, but you saw one of the main people who turned on Maximus originally was one of his right hand men.
Quintus.
Yeah, he's like, I serve Rome. So some people, no matter what, were just going to serve Rome because at the end of the day, if he didn't, a lot of the guys get that mindset where it's like, well, if they're not doing it, then someone else is going to do it. And then I could be murdered and my family could be murdered.
And here's this guy that won all these battles and
I
war,
mean,
basically. If they're just going to do him dirty like that, we're all
exactly.
We're all
If they could do it to him, what the hell can I could do? And then, they go to execute, right? The nice way of saying, it's an elegant way of saying murder, right? They go to execute Russell Crowe, who asks for an honorable death and somehow gets out of it, which, interesting, right? Which, quick side note, my God, they totally massacred those Germans, dude. That was crazy how quickly they
go back to the opening.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't talk about it earlier, but man, like, it's just one of those things where you're looking at, you're like, why did you guys even try to fight? You know, like you were so mismatched. I know they don't have guns at the time, but the technology, that just sea of arrows and the catapults and all this stuff just going flying at them was like such a crazy visual. The war scenes were very cool. It just sets a great tone. And like you said earlier, you know, Russell Crowe in there fighting with his men, just getting the respect of everyone and being a pretty big badass.
Going back to the, you know, the murdering of the wife and child, like talk about a plot point. If you're, you know, filmmaker, you're like, how can we get the audience to just totally root for this man to go on a revenge killing spree? You know, no better way than murder his wife and son. Then you're just full on board. Like, okay, I want this guy to just kill, you know, John Wick, kill as many people as he can in the most brutal of ways. Now I'm on board. Let the gladiator gladiate, you know.
It's funny you mentioned that because that's literally the same parallel I was thinking in my head as John Wick's dog died. It's like the quintessential action movie starting point is something was taken from them that shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
You know?
And this is the most intense, over-the-top way possible, too.
So, you know, going back, Russell Crowe escapes being executed. He gets away with 2 horses. He's going. And during that time, the way that director Ridley Scott, shout out Ridley, when his family actually dies, I almost was wondering, I'm like, is this a dream sequence? Because he kept having dreams. The way it's presented, I assume they're dreams of the Roman army coming to his house in Spain and killing his family. So the way, because he's in the desert or wherever it is, trying to escape to go back home, and you just see these visions of his home. So part of it makes me think that it's part of a dream. And there's some other stuff that comes up during that time where you're like, all right, this kind of seems like it's a dream sequence. And then all of a sudden he's home. And I had a little bit of hard time distinguishing between whether or not it was real or not at first. And the only time I really established that it's real is after he buries his family, which, by the way, I'm not married or I'll have kids, any of that stuff. But hypothetically, if my wife and child were murdered, I can understand. But man, that man had a lot of mucus coming out of his face. Like, I don't know what's going on, Russell Crowe. It was like all this stuff coming down his nose, his eyes, like blah, blah, blah. Mucus going on his dead wife's foot. Very messy. Crucified family is okay. Crucified family is okay, but mucus is where I draw the line.
Yeah.
But
could he get the man a Kleenex, you know, in between takes?
That was one of the main issues I had with the story, though, was the man buries his family and then takes a nap next to his family's grave. And randomly, someone just picks him up and throws him in a cage, and all of a sudden, he's a slave.
Why did you set up this great home in a place where there were slavers, you know, roaming about?
Yeah.
Just picking what, you know, his wife and kid, it seems like, could have been enslaved at any point.
Right. No, that's one thing I wrote in my notes back then. You could just be, if you're in a non-crowded area by yourself or with like 4 people or less, you could just be enslaved at any time is pretty much the vibe I got. Because this guy was, I mean, obviously he lost his will to live because his family died. But just how easily he was enslaved was just probably the only part of the story where I was just like, this is a little absurd. To me, at least.
Yeah.
It just seemed a little bit of a weird transition. So immediately he's enslaved. You meet, I don't remember the character's name, but it's the actor from the hit film Never Back Down, who's also a slave. They are on their way to, I guess, a new town to potentially be sold as slaves to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately they go in, they're sold and turned into gladiators. It's interesting to see how one of the first things that Commodus did when he became the emperor is reinstating gladiator fights, because the previous emperor, Marcus Aurelius, had gotten rid of that. He didn't think it was good for the people.
Yeah.
Versus Commodus deciding using it as a tool. And one of the senators mentioned, it's like, well, people aren't going to really notice when he gets rid of the Senate and takes over all this stuff because they're too busy with bloodlust and these other things. You know, it's the great distraction.
That's the interesting thing too with Commodus as well. It seems it's not just power. I mean, he definitely wants power and all that. That's typical, stereotypical villain arc. But he also desperately wants to be loved, and that's the more interesting and respected, because he, in his mind, neglected from his father. So he had a void that he's trying to fill.
Well, he was neglected.
Yeah.
I mean, before Marcus Aurelius died, one of the things he said was, oh, I've been at war 16 of the 20 years of my reign. There's only 4 years of
Yeah,
peace, you know, and
yeah,
why am I doing this? Like, it seems like a waste in hindsight, but that means that 16 of those 20 years, he wasn't there for
yeah.
Commodus as a child. He even says before he dies, the reason you're a bad son is because I was a bad father.
The reason you're the antagonistic villain of this film is because
Yeah, because I'm a
basically,
crappy father. Having said that,
yeah.
Maximus is fucking dope. Anyways, they go into the first fight, and
Or wait, hold on, back up. Before that, they meet Proximo. That's who buys them, right? The
yeah,
new slave owner, who
yeah,
is played by the infamous Oliver Reed. The actor actually died while filming, and he allegedly had 8 pints of beer, 12 shots of rum, half a bottle of whiskey, and a few shots of cognac. One of the first instances, I think, that they actually had to CGI and kind of recreate an actor to finish out some of the last scenes. They had to use a body double and CGI to depict him interacting with Maximus before his death. And then they used footage from earlier scenes and dialogue from other audio recordings, pieced it together, and then they did different angles of showing him, finally meet his demise. But that was a quick aside for the legendary death of actor Oliver Reed.
you find out later he was previously a former gladiator himself who won his freedom because Marcus Aurelius basically touched his shoulder and gave him a wooden sword to signify that he was free. And then what's the first thing he does is he becomes a manager for gladiators, which
Yeah,
essentially just, buying a bunch of gladiators and selling them out to
yeah,
see if he can find any good ones, since, he's still bitter that they basically were taken out of Rome, because it's like, oh, well, I'm stuck here in this no man town, blah, blah, blah. Eventually he gets to go back. But immediately you see Maximus come in there. He doesn't want to fight. He quickly, to save his life, decides to start fighting and becomes the Spaniard, as they call, which
yeah,
to me, I see a lot. Two of the things, and again, this is probably just because of my profession when I'm not doing this podcast, but tons of pro wrestling and UFC energy
yeah,
going on during this thing. He comes out there. Gladiators to me is essentially UFC for that time period. Men going in there killing each other for people's entertainment. And then, the ones who win the crowd over are the ones who gain their freedom, is one of the things our dearly departed friend Oliver, right?
yep,
Previously said.
Oliver.
And the most famous moment of the movie, I think everyone quotes, is, "Are you not entertained?" To me, I thought that would be in the Coliseum, not in the small town. But on top of that, too, tons of pro wrestling energy. You see him immediately just become the main star of these people. They're all screaming, "Spaniard, Spaniard, Spaniard." And then he figures out, once he hears that story about Oliver's character, again, bad with the Roman names, it's okay, say that he won his freedom by getting to meet the emperor. Maximus
Yeah,
comes up
light
essentially,
bulb.
comes up with the plan like, oh, so I can get close to the emperor by being in the Colosseum and winning. So that seems to be his goal, is to just get back to Rome so he can eventually kill the emperor, get his revenge for his murdered family.
That's the turning point, because before he doesn't want to participate in it. He kind of looks down at this whole thing. That's what there's the first fight, the red yellow chained fight, which is just a crazy, kind of massacre, but they still are able to come out on top. And then the second fight in those pits is when he's just, F this, I'm going to go out alone. All the other guys hang back. He just massacres everyone. That's when he does his "Are you not entertained?" And then Proximo, or Oliver Reed, is like, hey, you got to put on a show. You need the people to love you. That's how you get your freedom. That's how you meet the emperor, like you said. And then it clicks, and then he's all in for that. He's living for revenge now at that point.
Super random side note, Maximus's mask that he wears is almost, not quite, but the first part is very close to identical to a famous rapper named MF Doom. I don't know if you ever heard of MF Doom. He famously did that one project with Adult Swim with DJ Danger Mouse. And the mask is that he wears, this metal mask, is almost identical to the one that's worn in Gladiator, which I just thought was a random side thing. As a hip hop head, I enjoyed that. So he comes up there, he immediately starts accepting his fate as a gladiator, but him being revealed as Maximus came a lot sooner than I was expecting, and sooner than he was expecting too, because, immediately Commodus comes down and is like, I want to meet you, blah, blah, blah. You know, I want to see who this great gladiator is. He comes down, immediately turns his back on Commodus too. You
Yeah,
know, my
good
name's
afternoon.
Gladiator. Doesn't say his name, turns his back on him. And I think if it was like anyone else, Commodus just would have killed him on the spot. And he turns around, takes off the mask. He's like, I'm Maximus, blah, blah, blah. Because up until that point, he was trying to hide who he was. You know, remember, he took off the brand he had, saying he was part of the Roman army. He didn't want people to know who he was. Because to them, he
Right.
was just the Spaniard. He was trying to hide who he was as much as possible to get to the point where he could get his revenge. So he didn't want anyone tipping it off. But that ended very quickly. They found out who he was. We forgot to mention at this point, Lucia, I don't know how to say it, Commodus'
His
sister,
sister. Yeah.
yeah, who's the daughter of the former Marcus Aurelius, the former emperor, who, fun fact, she ended up being on Law and Order SVU years later as a main actress. Obviously had a thing for Maximus at one point. They never really said why that didn't, you know, come through. I know she said at the time her father wasn't as big a fan of him. They obviously had some sort of love connection, but you can see why Commodus might not be a fan. Not only is he jealous that he got his father's, you know, Maximus got his father's love, but Maximus also got his sister's love. And for some reason, Commodus really wants to hook up with his sister.
Oh yeah. Weird incest vibes. Heavy
No,
incest vibes.
not, like not just vibes. Like he literally later on in the
Explicit.
movie,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's all kind of vibes at first, like, oh, you should kiss me, oh, this, and then later on, when he finds out she's helping Maximus try to get back to his army to take him out, Commodus, that is, Commodus is like, look, basically, I'm going to kill your son unless you tell me what's going on, and then after, you know, they set up Maximus and Maximus gets caught and it's a lot of the people who helped him get murdered or whatever, Commodus looks at her and is basically like, you're going to birth me a pure blood heir and blah, 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 and all this other stuff.
Pure
And
blood.
yeah,
Inbred.
pure blood, which little did they knew scientifically years later they would discover, not the move, my guy, not the move.
No.
Yeah, just a lot of the twist and tangling with all their weird family dynamics and, you know,
Yeah.
the son she has who's just constantly used as a pawn by the emperor to get what he wants. And yeah, just he comes off always whiny, arrogant, creepy, just he needs to get whatever he wants even though he doesn't make sense. Like even when Commodus first comes back to Rome and the senators are trying to talk about the stuff they need to get done, his first reaction is like, how dare they talk to me like that at all? So we can tell obviously the guy's a winner.
Going back to that first battle in the Colosseum, that's where the big reveal happens of who Maximus actually is. That battle was really cool because it really demonstrates Maximus as the general.
Oh
He
yeah.
gives that speech to them. He goes, "We're going to stand much better odds if we work together." And then he starts calling out, tactics, orders, and they just decimate those chariot guys who should have clearly had the upper hand. It should have been a massacre in the other way, but because of his brilliant tactician, and general abilities, they were able to come on top. That's of course why Commodus then feels he needs to meet this guy, and then he delivers that epic speech about who he is. He gives his long name, Maximus, whatever, blah, blah, the father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. That's a holy shit moment. And I think that's one of the reasons why this movie is also so great. It's not just, they do the practical effects, they do the big epic battles with extras and all that, which is awesome. And that definitely pushes it up there. But the writing is really good. And that's something I've noticed just as we looked at a lot of these movies. These days with the budgets they have and how many people are willing to be actors and how many good actors there are. I mean, the cinematography usually is going to be pretty good in movies. The acting is usually going to be pretty good in movies. The thing that makes it or breaks it is really the writing. I think
Yeah.
in most instances. In this movie, the writing was on point. And that's why I think it transcends as an action movie. I watched it with Melissa. She loved it. And she doesn't like action movies at all. But she's like, that was a good story. And I'm like, yeah, that's why it's iconic, I think.
Again, another moment where I'm like, I feel like I'm watching pro wrestling when he cut that. That they call it a promo. He cuts that promo on Commodus being, and
Yeah.
also kind of similar to the Princess Bride, where I am Anina Montoya. You killed my father. I will kill you now.
Yeah.
Like kind of a similar energy to that. Super random, but watching this too, I'm looking at it and I'm like, what kind of sick fuck came up with the idea for gladiators to start off with? Like I was watching that, I'm like, what kind of sick bastard? And other people are like, yeah, that's a good idea. Like, can you imagine nowadays people trying to do that and everyone would just be like, yeah, we're not doing that. No way. Another note I have was like, it was crazy. Again, this is a little bit backtracking, but it's crazy how quickly Maximus got into being a gladiator. I guess it makes sense because he had more free time for activities now that his family was dead, but it didn't seem that long for him to turn the switch on. Immediately he's just like, oh yeah, I'm a killing machine, but
Yeah.
when you have that carrot dangling of being able to get your revenge, it makes sense.
Well, he had the military background and he fought in combat. It wasn't,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, but he tried to
a farmer
fight it
or
at
something.
first. Yeah, he tried to fight it. Well, he was a farmer. Remember, he kept saying, I just want to go and till my crops. That's all he said. He's like, I want to go home and do my crops. He brings it up. And then they come in, just seeing the vastness of the Colosseum, which I actually visited the Colosseum when I was younger. And it was a sight to behold to actually be in there. I can't imagine actually watching that event going on. And, not when they're at the Coliseum, but that guy, the slave who's about to go in, who just starts pissing himself. Talk about having a bad day. You get enslaved, and the guy's like, all right, so not only are you my property, but I want you to go die immediately. A lot of the fights, too, that these guys get put into as gladiators are just very stacked against them odds. They come in, there's these people in chariots who have bows and arrows, right? And all these things that are blatantly huge advantages. And Maximus, again, like you were saying earlier, with his military training and being a great general, was able to coach these guys on short notice to have the majority of them stay alive. Being able to take out those the chariots, like you said later, went out by himself and killed 5 or 6 guys. Actually, I think it was more like 8 on his own. One thing I saw that I think they need to bring back to professional sports is I would love if they threw loaves of bread into the crowd when I was at a baseball game. I'd much rather have a nice, and that bread looked good, way better than Wonder or anything like that. That looked like artisan.
Freshly made.
They're just throwing in the crowd. I'm like, bro, I'd much rather have that than a shitty t-shirt or like a hot dog that's like smushed together, shot out of the cannon. Getting fresh bread thrown at me would be like amazing. If I came home with that, or, I'm like, hey mom, I got you a fresh loaf of bread, she'd be pretty hype. Also, I thought it was weird, the relationship of, again, I'm terrible with the guy's name, Oliver, who died, who's the guy who bought Maximus as a slave. Towards the end, was trying to play off the fact that like he's like almost trying to be like his friend. And it's like, bro, like you're making this guy fight to the death and you're trying to act like you're his friend. Like if you're really his friend, let him go. He's like, well, I can't let you. I'm making too much money essentially, and only let him go after he got paid a bunch of money by the senator. I forgot the name, but when Commodus brings back the one gladiator who was previously undefeated.
I'm going to butcher the pronunciation probably, but it was like Tigress of Gaul, because I made that note of that fight.
Dude, his mask was so dope. The mask he had was so dope. And then also, dude, like, talking about having the odds stacked against you. Fucking tigers, bro. They got tigers. He's getting attacked by this guy who already has an advantage. And Undefeated. And the guy has fucking tigers. Ridiculous. And then Russell Crowe kills a tiger.
Well, and Commodus says right before the fight, oh, it's been arranged. Because this is the next fight after the reveal. He obviously wants Maximus dead. He doesn't want to just execute him because the crowd loves him. So he wants him to die in the arena in a way that seems kind of legitimate, I guess.
Right, even though the odds were stacked against him every time. I mean, even their last fight, Joaquin Wild, excuse me, that's a wrestler, sorry. Joaquin Phoenix stabbed him in the side so people couldn't see it and uses it like, oh, well, I'm going to fight him. That was same thing in obviously very different movies, but a lot of these movies like Paid in Full too, a lot of these guys' downfall is their hubris and just doing too much.
Yeah.
Like he could have literally stabbed him, thrown him out there with some other guy, had some other guy kill him. But no, he wanted to be the guy who killed him and ended up eventually costing Commodus his life, getting too greedy.
The nice thing about that setup is, I mean, obviously it's a little bit of it is a plot point, right? Because how are we going to end this with Russell Crowe being an imprisoned gladiator but killing the emperor, right? Like, so that's obviously going to be a little bit unrealistic, but I could buy in the fact that this guy was so egotistical and so wanted to be loved. He wanted to be the one standing in the Coliseum with the fans, cheering him on and being, I'm the one who defeated this guy that you
Yeah.
all love, showing that and then he does the cheap shot with the stabbing him so that he thinks in his mind he's going to come out on top no matter what. He has all of his soldiers surround them so that if things go sideways, he thinks that, he can maybe rely on them, which, then final shout out to Quintus, who finally comes through, which I was really surprised by that, since that dude, in the beginning, he's just blatantly following Commodus's orders, and backstabbing Maximus. But then in that final showdown, it wasn't yet super clear that Commodus was going to be killed. He lost his sword, and then he's asking for, give me a sword, and Quintus is just, fuck this guy, sheathe your swords.
Well,
and I thought that was like a really big, I mean, if Commodus survived that battle, that dude's
yeah.
fucked, right?
Well, I think Quintus had seen enough. They don't really establish how much time happened between, that first war where they tried to kill Russell Crowe to the end.
Yeah.
You don't really know how far, but I think Quintus had seen enough of Commodus's rule to know that this guy sucks and he wants to get rid of him. He serves him because he serves Rome, but he's like, this is going to be the best opportunity to get him. To quote Drago, if he dies, he dies. It's just, yeah, I thought that was interesting too. But he just was like, I'm going to take this chance because, working for this guy, I could die at any point too. Look what he wanted to do to Maximus, who was a hero of Rome, who put Rome on his back and did all this stuff to help Rome. Like, if he was willing to do that to him, what would he do to me? So I think it was a self-preservation. Another thing, as far as like the timeline here, Commodus's sister, her and Russell Crowe make out towards the end. Like, how long was Russell Crowe's grieving his burnt and ravaged, as it was said, ravaged wife who was crucified just for being married to him, didn't do anything, crucified just being married to him. And he's over here making out with women like months later.
Yeah.
It's like, bro, where's the grieving? Like, where's the stuff? And he's like, man, I really miss my dead crucified wife, but she is pretty bad though. And she's down, like immediately just starts making out with her, which was pretty wild. I thought having Commodus wear the all white getup for the last scene thought was cool, because then the blood really pops, and it also kind of shows him trying to present himself as the savior of Rome, like the beacon white light of Rome type almost, that's how he sees himself. And then all it did is really make the blood pop. And sadly, Maximus ends up dying too, due to that initial stab, which seems crazy to me that he was able to defeat this guy in battle, but wasn't able to survive the stab wound. Seemed a little weird to me. So it's Maximus gets his happy ending, because his happy ending is going, they even mention, again, I forgot the character's name, but the actor from Never Back Down talks about wanting to see his daughters and wife again. Him and Russell Crowe talk about Russell being able to see his family in the next life, whenever that is. Maximus gets his happy ending of be reunited with his family that was so brutally taken away from him.
Like that tie back, the last words they end on is, I'll see you again, but not yet. And that's one of the things that they said earlier in the movie. You'll see your family again, but not yet. So I liked how they brought that full circle to him saying that to his friend and burying those little toys or whatever that Maximus had.
Those random dolls he just randomly had out of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how that guy wound up with them, but it was a nice little closure to the movie. Yeah.
Overall, highly enjoyed the movie. Ridley Scott did a great job. Excited to see number 2. I'm curious to see where exactly the sequel goes. On a level, like I said, of, not entertained to entertained, I was heavily entertained. Would I rewatch it? Yeah. Would I rewatch it a lot? Probably not. A bit longer than I like on a rewatch. But I heavily enjoyed it. I feel like it's a movie that I could rewatch and see a bunch of stuff I didn't see the first time I watched it. Sad I didn't watch it sooner. Not the end of the world, but I'd probably give it a strong 8 or 9. Good film. Enjoyed it. Excited for 2, which if you're watching this, check out Schway Nostalgia on YouTube. You're probably already on our YouTube page. We should by now already have up Gladiator 2. This is probably going to be coming after, but appreciate everyone for listening. Adam, thank you for your time. I got to head out real quick. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to check out all our other videos. Like, share, subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. If you can too, check us out. Schway Nostalgia 2 on TikTok, and then Schway Nostalgia on all of their social media. Also, check out schwaynostalgia.com if you want merch or anything. Adam, thanks again. I'll be talking to you later today. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And let us know what you think in the comments, guys. And let us know what movies you'd like us to review.